Laos is one of the poorest countries in Asia. It is landlocked, wrapped in mountains, and for almost its entire modern history, it had no real railway at all. A few kilometers of rusting colonial track left behind by the French, and that was the entire national rail network. Then, in the space of just 5 years, this small country got a brand new 1,000-kilometer modern railway, driven straight through some of the most punishing terrain on the continent. And it cost roughly a third of everything the entire nation produces in a single year. A sleek electric train now glides out of the capital, Vientiane, climbs through jungle-covered mountains, and crosses the border into China on a line called the China-Laos Railway. A journey that used to take days of bone-rattling road travel now takes hours. For a country that had been left behind by almost every wave of modern development, it looks like a miracle dropped out of the sky. But here is where the story gets complicated and far more interesting than the headline. You may have seen this described as a $20 billion railway that swallowed Southeast Asia while the West was not looking. The real numbers are different, the map is messier, and the truth underneath is a genuine drama. Because the hardest question about this railway was never how to build it. It was who pays, who owns it, and what a country gambles when it bets a third of its economy on a single line of steel. By the end of this video, you will understand why honest, intelligent people look at the exact same railway and see either the salvation of a nation or the trap that captured it. Start with why Laos wanted this so badly that it was willing to take such a risk. Look at the map and the problem is obvious. Laos is one of only a handful of landlocked countries in the region, with no coastline, no ports, and mountains in nearly every direction. Moving goods in or out meant slow, expensive trucking over bad roads through neighboring countries. For a developing economy, that geography is a cage. So Lao leaders latched onto a dream they summed up in a single phrase. They wanted to turn their country from landlocked into land-linked, to become not a dead end, but a corridor. And that dream fit perfectly inside a much bigger Chinese vision, a plan to eventually run a railway all the way from Kunming in southern China, down through Laos and Thailand, toward Malaysia and Singapore. Laos would be the crucial first link in a chain meant to stitch a whole region together. The prize was enormous. The question was the price. And before the price, there was the terrain, because the geography that isolated Laos also made building anything through it brutally hard. The route had to climb out of the lowlands and carve through range after range of steep, jungle-covered mountains. So instead of winding around them, the engineers went straight through. On the Laos section alone, crews bored 75 tunnels and threw up well over 160 bridges. Add it together, and more than half of the entire railway does not touch the ground it crosses. It is either buried inside a mountain or flying over a valley, and the ground held one more horror. Parts of Laos are among the most heavily bombed places on Earth, soaked with unexploded ordnance dropped during the wars of the last century. Before crews could lay a single meter of track in some areas, teams had to go in and clear live bombs that had been waiting in the soil for 50 years. So the line was finished in about 5 years, roughly a year ahead of schedule, through mountains, jungle, and minefields. As a pure feat of construction, it is genuinely staggering. But here is the turn this whole story hinges on. The mountains were never the real problem. China has built railways through far worse. The real problem, the one that makes this story matter, was the money. Think about the arithmetic. The Laos section of the railway cost around $6 billion, and the entire economy of Laos, everything the country produces in a year, is only somewhere in the range of $15 to $20 billion. So this single railway cost roughly a third of the nation's entire annual output. To feel that, imagine a single construction project that cost the United States several $1 trillion, all at once. There was no possible way a country as poor as Laos could simply pay for this. So the question was never really, can we build it? It was, how on earth do we afford it? And the answer to that question is where China's true power in this story lies. The structure they built is revealing. The railway is owned by a joint venture company, and China holds 70% of it, with Laos holding the remaining 30%. Most of the construction was funded by loans from a Chinese state bank. And here is the part that matters most. Laos was so short of money that it had to borrow even to cover its own smaller share of the bill, taking out yet another Chinese loan just to buy into the railway running through its own country. So China designed the railway, China built the railway, China lent the money for the railway, and China owns the majority of the railway. Laos got its miracle line, but it got it almost entirely on credit, owed largely to the same country that built it. And that single fact is the seed of everything that worries people about this project. Before we get to whether that gamble is paying off or backfiring, this is the perfect moment to subscribe, because the next part, what this railway has actually done to the country it runs through, is where the story splits in two, and you are going to want to see both halves. Start with the bright half, because the upside is real. The railway transformed how Laos moves. A trip from the capital to the old royal city of Luang Prabang that once took 8 to 10 grueling hours by road now takes under 2 hours. Tourists came flooding back. In one recent year, foreign visitor numbers in the first half jumped from around 42,000 to over 1.5 million, a wave of travelers who simply stepped onto a train. And the railway opened a door for Lao farmers that never existed before. Refrigerated trains now carry perishable fruit, bananas, cassava, and especially durian, the prized fruit Chinese consumers cannot get enough of, from Lao plantations into the vast Chinese market in hours instead of days. According to Chinese railway authorities, in its first 4 years, the line carried more than 62 million passenger trips and moved more than 72 million tons of cargo. The World Bank estimated that with the right reforms, the railway could eventually lift total income in Laos by as much as 20% over the long run. For a country that size, that is not an improvement. That is a different future. Now the dark half, because it is just as real, and this is where the honesty matters most. While the railway was opening, the country around it was sliding into a debt crisis. Laos now owes somewhere around $13 to $14 billion to foreign lenders, a debt larger than its entire economy, and by most estimates, around half of that is owed to China. Its currency, the kip, lost roughly half its value. Inflation at one point ran above 40%, gutting ordinary people's savings. Spending on health and education as a share of the economy was cut by more than half over a decade, as more and more of the government's money went to servicing debt. And in 2020, with the country struggling, a Chinese company took a 90% stake in the company that runs Laos's national power grid on a 25-year lease. To critics, that looked like the textbook nightmare. A poorer country borrows for a giant project, cannot pay, and starts handing over its crown jewel assets to the lender. The phrase you will hear for this is debt trap diplomacy. But here is where a responsible version of this story has to slow down, because that phrase is hotly disputed, and the truth is genuinely murky. Many serious economists argue that the debt trap idea, the notion that China deliberately lends money, hoping countries fail so it can seize their assets, is largely a myth. Laos's debt crisis was not caused mainly by the railway at all. It was driven much more by years of overbuilding hydropower dams, an entirely separate gamble. China has actually kept Laos afloat, repeatedly deferring billions in payments rather than forcing a default. And Laos's own president has publicly rejected the idea that his country fell into a trap. So, which is it? Predatory capture, or a poor country that made its own risky bets and leaned on the one neighbor willing to fund its dreams? The most honest answer is that it is genuinely both and neither, and anyone who tells you it is a simple story is selling you a side. Which brings us to the headline itself, and the two claims hiding inside it, because both deserve a correction. First, The price. The famous $20 billion figure does not belong to this railway. The China-Laos line cost around $6 billion. $20 billion is closer to the price of a different Chinese-backed railway, the one being built across Malaysia. China is pouring tens of billions into rail across the whole region, but not into one magical line. And second, the idea that this swallowed Southeast Asia while the West missed it. That is only half true. The grand dream of a single railway from China to Singapore is still mostly unbuilt. The Thai section is years behind schedule, and it suffered a deadly construction collapse that killed dozens of people. The Malaysian line is not finished. The route through Myanmar is frozen by civil war. There is, as of today, no continuous high-speed railway across Southeast Asia. As for the West missing it, the country that actually competed hardest in this region for decades was not the United States or Europe at all. It was Japan, which has quietly poured even more infrastructure money into Southeast Asia than China has, and which China beat head-to-head for a major rail contract in Indonesia. The West was slow, but the real race was China against Japan, not China against an absent-minded United States. So what is the real achievement here, underneath the awe and the alarm? It is not the tunnels, impressive as they are. It is the package. When Laos wanted to transform itself and could not possibly pay, only one country in the world showed up, offering to do everything at once. To design it, build it, finance it, and operate it, all in a single deal, fast, and without the lectures and conditions that Western institutions attach. That combined capability, the ability to walk into a poor country and hand it a finished, financed mega-project, is what China has that almost no one else does, and it is exactly why the Belt and Road has reshaped so much of the developing world. The railway is the visible thing. The model behind it, build plus finance plus own, deployed across dozens of countries, is the real machine. Laos went from a few kilometers of rusting colonial track to a 1,000-kilometer modern railway in 5 years, and in doing so, it placed one of the biggest bets any small nation has ever made, wagering a third of its economy on the promise that being connected to China will be worth the debt of getting there. The trains are running, the durian is moving, the tourists are coming, and the loans are still owed. Whether this railway ends up remembered as the line that lifted Laos out of isolation, or the one that quietly signed away its independence, will not be decided by the engineering, which already worked. It will be decided by whether a small country can grow fast enough to outrun the debt it took on to build its own future. And somewhere on that track right now, a train full of people who had no say in any of it is gliding through the mountains toward an answer nobody has yet. If this changed how you see what is really being built across the developing world, you know what to do. Subscribe. There is a lot more to show you.